Mercedes W201 has two lower ball joints up front. Here is a technique that I use to replace them. Whenever I have the tires off the car, I always inspect the suspension. The ripped rubber boots on these lower ball joints mean they need replacing. You can see that all the lubricating grease is gone from them. Ball joints press into the lower control arm and attach to the hub carrier with a pinch bolt and nut. The technique I use does not compress the coil spring. I think this is much safer than methods that do compress the spring. I'm using a regular floor jack to support the control arm, and I use the spring compressor just to hold the coils in a relaxed state. There are several types of spring compressors out there. Whatever type you choose, read the warnings and instructions carefully before using it. I am also using a ball joint press. This is another tool that can be dangerous if used incorrectly, so read and follow the instructions and always wear safety glasses. I'll start by loosening the lug nuts and raising the car high on one side for plenty of elbow room. I placed the jack stand under the center cross member. This makes room to place the floor jack under the control arm and leaves plenty of space to fit various tools in the wheel well. Always place a second jack stand at the jack point, or at least place the wheel under the sill for extra safety. So the sway bar end bracket comes off first. The 13mm nuts will probably be loaded up with dirt and rust. So let's clean them off and spray some penetrating oil to help get them loose. Keep the nuts and washers and bracket in a safe place. Pull the bar end clear of the threaded studs. Now, at the back of the caliper, on the bottom of the hub carrier, is this little bolt. That's a bump stop. It contacts the lower control arm over here, and it keeps you from turning the wheel too far. So that is going to be a 17mm, and we're going to put that right on there. It's really rusted there and very tight. Once I get a few threads to show, I'm adding some penetrating oil. I'll let that set in for a while, and then it should thread right off. Much easier. And here is the real objective. I can now get tools on the nut and pinch bolt. This is what actually clamps the ball joint to the hub carrier, and it is also very rusty and coated with grime. I'll just clean that up a little bit, and now get out the spring compressor tool. As I said, I'm not going to compress anything. There is a tremendous amount of energy trapped in a compressed car spring, which really increases the danger. So read and follow the instructions for use. This particular model slips over the coils and has lock pins for safety. I have just used one side as I am not applying any force to the threaded rod. With the floor jack under the control arm, I attached the compressor to hold the spring in this mostly relaxed state. Notice how much space I've left between the coils. Yeah, power tools are great. Just don't use them on this job. Just use regular hand wrenches. They will work fine. Next, grab some long zip ties. We're going to use them in a few minutes. I'll trap the pinch bolt head with a 19mm box wrench. And then get a 19mm socket and an extension to clear the hub carrier. This nut is really torqued down. I needed a breaker bar to twist it loose. But then it ratcheted off smoothly. This is another fastener you may need to pre-treat with penetrating oil first. The pinch bolt is wedged tightly and a little corroded. I'll use this brass drift and a 2-pound hammer to tap it out. Double check the floor jack is in place to support the control arm. The drift is larger than the bolt, so I've switched to a smaller center punch. With the ball joint now unbolted from the hub carrier and the sway bar end clear of the studs, it's time to gently lower the floor jack. And it's free. A closer look at the old ball joint shows how bad these can get. The rubber boot looks like it might have been made out of compressed lizard. The grease all squished out, and water, dirt, and rust moved in. It's a surprise it's even still connected. Okay, let's link 2 zip ties together and tie the front strut to the spring up out of the way. It's time to push the ball joint out with the press tool. Read and follow the warnings and directions. A few minutes reading can save hours of frustration. Familiarize yourself with the parts and how they fit together. Inspect for damage and never use a cracked or bent tool. The space inside the wheel well is pretty tight. It was going to be hard for me to place the lights, the camera, myself, and of course the tool, and still get anything useful for you to see. So let's use this handy spare control arm on the workbench. The tool weighs a lot, so I'll counterbalance with these. Let's say, here's your old ball joint ready to press out, but you need to press on the joint body, not the stud. The upper thrust plate has a large hole that allows clearance for the stud. The plate actually applies force to the stronger shoulder of the joint. So we start assembling the tool by putting this on top of the ball joint. Next up is the press tool itself. It too has a relief hole at the top to accommodate the ball joint stud. It fits perfectly on the raised ridge of the upper thrust plate. So we're ready to press the joint down, but it needs space to move into. That's what this metal sleeve becomes. Space for the ball joint to move into. When you pair it with the lower thrust plate, it forms a metal cup to press against the lower control arm, but leave space for the joint to pass into. The plate and sleeve fit underneath, between the control arm and the press tool. Spin the press bolt up to tighten it and tilt the tool to align it. You want the press to exert force in as straight an alignment as possible. And there it is, our press tool stack. Get some penetrating oil. Soak the perimeter of the ball joint where it meets the control arm before attaching the tool. As I said, filming and operating the tool in a tight space wasn't really working. With the old ball joint out, I could now really clean up the control arm perch. There was dirt and grime and rust to remove. The inner surface has to be really clean for the new joint to seat properly. Now, on the old ball joint, you'll see that this groove goes all the way around the stud, and so it's not as critical that this notch in the base plate match up. However, on the new ball joint, the groove is only on one side of the stud. This is the path for the pinch bolt to pass through, and it's very critical then that this notch line up correctly. As you clean the perch, you'll notice crimp marks on the interior. This is why it has to be really clean. The new ball joint has spline teeth that bite into the metal and keep it aligned. The base plate notch has to face the center of the control arm. Turn the joint so that the groove faces inward along the arm. Insert the ball joint in the arm just enough that the teeth catch and hold it in place. The camera didn't fit underneath, but I can show you with this mirror. See the notch? I've lined it up with the 0 stamped in the bottom of the control arm. Okay, reassemble the tool. This time the sleeve goes on the top. But the thrust plates stay the same. You still need the top one to have the relief hole for the ball stud. This part really needed some force to move it, a breaker bar and a two-handed pull. I'm showing this at double speed. It went a lot slower for me to close the gap. And there it is. Gap closed between ball joint and arm. No space, no dirt trapped, just a clean connection all around. Off comes the press tool, and then let's have a look. This is exactly what we wanted to see. New ball joint pressed in, and the pinch bolt groove facing where it should be. Now to get the stud back into the hub carrier. The new joint is of course much stiffer. It's filled with grease and it's not worn out. Okay, let's cut those zip ties that were holding the strut aside. I'll raise the jack and also wiggle the strut and hub carrier. It does take some finesse, but once the stud is lined up, I can gently tap the connection home with the 2-pound hammer. Notice I am just tapping lightly and not on the ball joint itself. When it seats properly, the new pinch bolt just slides right through. Place the new nut with the flat side in and the cone side outward. The nut starts to bite with a few threads, so I'll advance it a bit with some hand wrenches. Then it is the 19mm socket and extender. Set your torque wrench to 125 Newton meters, which is about 92 foot-pounds. With the pinch bolt installed, slacken the coil spring compressor and remove it. The sway bar end bracket is next. Torque this to 20 Newton meters or 15 foot-pounds. I switched to some new stainless steel fasteners this time. Still 13mm, just much easier to take off next time. I don't have a stainless replacement for the bump stop bolt, so I'm adding a little rust inhibiting oil to the threads before replacing it. I also don't have a torque spec for it, so I'm just getting it down fairly tight. And there it is, a serious upgrade from what was in there before. I've increased the safety, reduced tire wear, and improved the handling. Don't forget though, always do both sides. So clamp the other spring, remove the other ball joint, press in the new one, lining up the notch of course. Press it in, line up the pinch bolt, torque everything correctly, and get the car back on its wheels. You know, one of my favorite parts of the job is putting the tools away. Just the ritual of oiling the moving parts and cleaning everything up for next time. It seems like closure on a job well done. And don't forget, a $100 tool can do a $300 job, and more than once. Also, don't forget to add the date, the mileage, and the parts cost to your service log. Just look at these old ball joints. These two are textbook examples of what happens when the boot rips and the grease gets out. This one just wore out super fast. It flops around and barely stays in the socket. This one actually rusted solid. It is just as dangerous because of the strain that it puts on the other front end parts, and it's much more likely to just shear off and cause a real problem. So take a look under your car soon, and if your ball joints look like this, better get them replaced pronto. Thank you for watching, and here's wishing you those 4 M's. Many more Mercedes miles. This video was made possible by subscribers like you. And
clicking the like button.
Thank you.